Hey everyone, Dan Matarisi here with another webinar recap from McKonly Asbury. Data Analytics, Better Decisions, Better Business was a live webinar that was originally produced on Thursday, January 25th, 2018. For this webinar, we were joined by two of our team members here at McKonly Asbury, Sam BowerCraft and Janice Snyder. We hope you enjoy this webinar recap, and please visit us online at www.macpas.com for more information about future webinars and all of our other events.
Very good. Thank you, Dan. Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm still in morning time. I'm going to drink some more tea. Thanks for joining us today at this webinar. My name is Sam BowerCraft, as Dan mentioned. I'm a senior manager in the internal audit and management consulting group here at the firm. Been here for a little over 13 years now. I do financial security consulting and data analysis and a variety of other things. My main job is to help businesses to get better. That's really the crux of what I do here within the firm, supporting groups internally and externally as our clients. My background is actually in engineering and information systems, which makes me one of the larger geeks here in the firm. But that's okay. I embrace it, and I love it. I'm here with Janice Snyder, a partner in the audit segment. And Janice, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Sam. I lead our firm's audit segment, and I've been doing financial statement and employee benefit plan audits for nearly 20 years at this point. So I certainly understand the importance of data and data analytics, and I rely pretty heavily on Sam and his expertise to support not only our audit practice, but to support a lot of things I need internally when I need an answer to the question that I have or some data that I need analyzed. Sam is definitely my go-to guy. So we look forward to this webinar today, and hopefully you have some good takeaways from this. Very
good. Thank you, Janice. I didn't even have to pay you for that, so that was very nice compliments. In my presentations, I like to highlight the fact that I find webinars to be an interesting animal as far as presenting goes. It's hard to see people from where I'm sitting. I do like to point out that there's more to it. There's more to us than just our voices and this amazing content you're about to observe and share with you. For me, I like to hike. I like to get out and do some big hikes with some friends every year. So if you don't know me very well, you can think of me as a geeky guy with 50 pounds of gear on his back, moving through the mountains. It keeps me out of trouble and keeps me generally in shape, or in better shape than I would be otherwise. Janice?
Great. Thanks, Sam. Well, as Sam's focusing on exercise, I'm focusing on food here. So I am a gluten-free, and I love gluten-free cooking. So in particular, I love desserts, cakes, pies, cookies. I mean, who doesn't? But making them gluten-free is a little bit trickier. So certainly something I would call a hobby of mine.
Brilliant, yeah. And she makes some very good baked goods. So keep those coming, Janice. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Sam.
So we're going to jump into our objectives here. Obviously, we're talking about data analytics today and data analysis. We're going to cover these three areas. Our purpose, what is the purpose of data analytics? How do we use data analytics for problem solving? And we'll wrap up with starting your data analytics journey or carrying it forward, depending on where you are on the path. So first, the purpose. Before we dig into the purpose, I'm going to ask everyone a question. If you just take a moment, I like to engage with the audience here and make this a little more personal for you. Obviously, I can speak about data analytics for some time. But before we get started, what measurable objectives do you have in your organization that you keep track of? Just take a moment to think about, what makes your business successful, and just something, one or two things, three if you're ambitious, things that you're measuring or that you keep track of or you worry about within your organization. It's net income, gross income.
Yeah, Sam, I certainly think of a lot of manufacturing companies look at gross profit by product, which items they're selling, or price per case or price per unit,
Sure.
Things like that. But I think something I have in common with a lot of my clients is we're always watching employee turnover. Are employees leaving? Why are they leaving? Are we getting them to stay, which retention is even better? But I certainly see that at almost all organizations, as they're certainly watching
Sure.
their employees and why they're coming and going.
Very good. So hopefully you've taken a moment to write something down, and we'll revisit what you've written down here in just a little bit. So data analysis defined. Data analysis is, I don't normally read slides, but I will this time. Process of inspecting, cleansing, transforming, and modeling data. So it's important to note that data analysis is a process. It is many steps in many different ways, and it can be some of these aspects, and it can be many of these aspects. And ultimately, it's the goal of we want to discover useful information, suggest conclusions, and support decision making. In the end of the day, data analysis is really about gaining better insight and understanding, better information, so that we can make better choices and act in a better way. Obviously, sometimes we have conversations or we do analysis and it doesn't help us. But that's information as well sometimes. Oh, well, we did an analysis and it didn't really give us what we needed, but you know that you don't have to do that anymore. You can choose a new path. But we want to do analysis and figure out what we're going to do differently going forward to get better. Now, it should be noted that sometimes you do an analysis and it will point out that you shouldn't change what you're doing. But we want to be making those choices based on information, not just guessing. There are a couple different methods for data analysis. I'm a big context person, so I think it's important to touch base on these so that we understand exactly what type of analysis we're doing and the value and quality of that analysis. When we talk about qualitative analysis, this is analysis that isn't quantitative. It can't be measured specifically. These are some of these methods include interviews, discussions. When you have a sit down with a colleague and you talk about why things are working a certain way, that's qualitative. You can't sit down and do math against those things, but it can provide some insights into the topic at hand. And those evaluations are qualitative and usually intuitive in nature as well. They might be based on some information, but we're also using our intuition. Quantitative, obviously, is something we can measure. Units, prices, proportions, we could do math against it. It's pretty well defined in general, because usually if you're measuring something, you've defined it in some way in order to make sure that you can do math against it. And so when we're comparing analysis as well, we also want to be aware of the conversations about, well, what kind of analysis did we do and what's the value of that analysis? Because decisions without data are another way of saying it's a great opinion, but what's backing that up?
So I think of my example with employee retention, Sam, where you're looking at this. There are certainly quantitative aspects of how many people are we keeping, where are they coming from, why are they, there's actual data to that, but there's a lot of qualitative information as well that you can do through exit interviews or focus groups of people who are staying and why they're staying. So I really think the two together could be very helpful.
Oh, absolutely. Because the qualitative aspect can provide some insight that numbers cannot. And the next slide we'll talk about that. The qualitative aspects, they're subjective, they're exploratory, they're observational, but they do add color. They're contextual. You can do a calculation about employee retention, but understanding the reasons behind that may be qualitative in nature. And qualitative aspects are semi-structured. Quantitative, much more objective. Obviously, a 10 is a 10, a 9 is a 9. They can be generalizing. They can be specific as well, but there's a balance between those two. They're testing in nature. They're fixed and controlled. Everyone loves algebra, right? Everybody,
Of course.
Of course, everyone loves algebra. It makes your phones work, so be grateful for algebra. But it's fixed and controlled. We can set variables. We can understand what's driving the outcomes in a much better way with a quantitative analysis. We can measure before and after we do things. Obviously, if we do something, if we measure it before and then we change our behavior and then we measure it afterwards, we can do some comparatives, but only if we measure it in some way. And it's structured. Brilliant. So there's an action cycle that I thought was very helpful with regard to this. Because again, what's the purpose of data analysis? It's to make better decisions. It's to improve our view of the world so that we can act in a better way. This action cycle distills that. We want to form a goal, intention to act, planning to act, execution. Obviously, we do something. Execution is just doing your daily routine. It's your organization operating on a daily basis. You get feedback. People tell you that things are going well or aren't going well. You get data back. You're making money. You're making less money.
Hopefully more money.
Hopefully more money. I think in general, we're all for that. And then you need to evaluate the outcome, and then hopefully that evaluation provides you more insight. And then we can change how we go forward. In the context of life, our actions and activities are part of a larger strategy within the organization. And we're not going to go through this entire level, but strategy is based on vision, mission, objectives, strategies, and activities, as you can see here. We're going to jump down to the first one, though. And first question is, what are your key metrics? Obviously, I asked the question earlier, but what are you measuring? What do you hope to achieve? Do you want to earn $100,000 this year in your organization, or whatever it might be? And how are you going to measure those things? Now, strategies are sort of a higher level theme to achieve those metrics. But ultimately, what we're really focused on, and what a lot of people focus on by their nature, is activities. What activities support your strategies? And those strategies result in some sort of metric. So as we do data analysis, we need to be aware that, analysis is great, but we need to make sure that we're focused on that purpose. What are we trying to achieve? Because if we're not aware of the purpose, then we're just doing analysis for fun. And if you have a lot of good data, it's easy to dig into it. Janice is smiling.
As Sam thinks. Sam does love that.
Everybody loves that.
No, I'm usually looking for the outcome, Sam.
Yeah, okay. Yes, I know. But it's easy to get a bunch of data and start digging into it, and then sort of end up at a place where you're asking yourself, well, why did I just do all those things? And then you have to go back and revamp. So let's talk about the steps to revamp so that we don't get lost. Because as I said, there's data galore. I think it's fair to say that everyone today is getting more and more information. And the question is it useful? Varied sources, whatever it might be, social media, the news, data within your business and organization, sources of information related to your business. I'm part of a professional group and they provided this survey or resource of data. How can I use that within my organization to make my organization better? And it's important to set that in context, because we can get all the data we want, but we only have so much resource to take action and evaluate that. And Janice.
I work with some organizations that have really great dashboards that really streamline that data. They pull from multiple sources. It's a great snapshot of their business on a daily, to the minute, some of them, of what's going on, what are they producing, what are their sales, or how many patients have we served today, and that's really great. But the question is, are we getting the right information?
Right.
So sometimes there can just be way too much of it. So like I said, some organizations do this really, really well, and others have room for improvement.
There's always opportunity. Yeah, absolutely. And on the spectrum, are you getting enough data or are you getting too much? And then are you analyzing it enough or not, or too much? And some people say, well, we need to act now. It's like, well, we need to analyze a little bit more. And some groups say, well, we need to analyze more. And that's referred to as analysis paralysis, where you just want to analyze until you know the perfect answer. But sometimes you just need to take action. So everyone loves algebra, or at least how it works and how it's benefited us. And now we get to revisit the scientific method, because data analysis is directly related to the scientific method. Now, we're going to go through this cycle in two different ways. One is the scientific method, and the other is a framework that I have put together with regard to data analysis. You'll see that they're actually very similar, but I wanted to run through the scientific method real quickly because it's something we all have in common. We all learned the scientific method when we were younger, and we all said, I will never need this when I grow up. And the reality is that's not true, because we use this every day in an informal manner. So we're going to talk about this in a formal manner and how it relates to data analysis, and then we'll run through the framework I have, and we'll talk about next steps that you can take. And we'll probably hit on some examples as we go along. This is a good spot if limber up your fingers if you have any questions as we go through this, and how, as we're discussing these steps, how it may apply to your organization. Feel free to send us a question. We would appreciate it. So before we jump into it, we'll talk about data analysis defined again. It's about inspecting, cleansing, transforming, and modeling, because we want to discover useful information and suggest conclusions. So keep that in mind as we go through these. So the scientific method, it's really about observational analysis. Scientific method basically says, well, what do we see and what can we observe? And what's interesting about the scientific method is it actually doesn't prove anything. It just doesn't disprove something, which is very important, and we'll talk about why that is. So the first question is, choose something you're curious about. Why is our net profitability going up? You know, some people would say, well, we're not going to question that because who cares, right?
It's a good thing.
It's a good thing. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Yeah, exactly. But the rub is, if you don't know why it's going up, that could be concerning to management as well. You know, are you not accounting for something correctly? Maybe your net profitability is not going up. So choose something you're curious about. You know, obviously, if your net profit is going down, you would be curious about that as well. But when we're talking about asking the question, it doesn't have to be about something that's broken. It can be about just understanding something in a deeper way. We want to make a hypothesis, an educated guess at the question's answer. Why do you think net profit is going up? What do we expect it to be? Did we expect it to go up? You know, and we want to be aware of the reasoning for your expectation. The reason it's important to make a hypothesis in these areas is because we have to be cautious about reverse validation. Our brains are really good at going back in time and saying, oh, I knew that was going to happen, or I knew that already. And that's just psychology at work. But what helps us to be better at predicting is to make articulated predictions about what we think the reason is and to write it down. Because otherwise what happens is we kind of have this idea in our mind. It's like, well, maybe it's that. And then we go through the analysis and we say, oh, yeah, I was right. But that's not necessarily the case. And it doesn't help us to be better at making predictions in the future if we're always going back in time and using reverse validation, which is not the best way to do that. And we want to be aware.
I heard you say, Sam, you got to write it down.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah. So, yeah.
I know that's helpful, but
writing it down is very helpful because, as I like to say, I do a lot of documentation, and I've heard people say that, oh, Sam really likes documentation. And I do like documentation, but I don't like documenting. But what I point out to people is everyone likes to look things up. When you're setting up your new home TV or stereo, it's great to have a manual that's really useful. Everybody likes to look things up, but no one likes to write things down. But it can be really quite beneficial to have a little bit more formality in the process and to say, okay, well, here's the question, and here's what I think the reason is. Here's what I think the outcome is and why. And it's also the other important thing to do is to be aware of your hypothesis and that you're not making a conclusion, because there's a very large difference. It's a small verbal difference, but a large psychological difference when we say something like, I think our net profit is going up because we've lowered labor costs. That is different than saying, my hypothesis is net profits are going up because we lowered labor costs. And the difference is the word think, because in the second one, it's very easy if you state your conclusion if you state your hypothesis as a conclusion, you're probably going to find evidence to support your conclusion versus stating the idea as just that, an idea. Because I don't know about anybody else, but I don't like being wrong. It has happened in the past. My sisters have told me. But it's important to note that if we state these things as an idea, we will be more nimble mentally to change our perspective. Whereas if you declare it as fact, you're going to have a tendency to want to prove yourself right. I mean, we all like to be right, but it can be difficult to change our perspective. And scientists face this all the time. They want something to be a certain way, and even in spite of the evidence, they'll say, well, I just need to be doing more experimentation. Well, if the data says that it's not that way, then you have to let go. And that's one of the beauties of the scientific method. So experimentation in this case is putting the hypothesis to the test. Now, frequently we're doing data analysis after the fact, so the experiment has already occurred. Our businesses have run for a year, or the new marketing plan has been going on for 6 months, and we want to see how that impacted sales. But your business is in motion. So, well, then we need data. So after we do all these things, we just need some data. We need to record the outcome of the experiment. In this case, it's our business. Business is an experiment. How do we operate in this environment successfully? And we look for financial data, customer satisfaction data, market share, whatever it might be, operational costs. We need to be aware of that data. Now, the rub here, too, is, and I won't dig into it too much now because we're going to pick up on it a bit more later, is do you have the data that you need? Sometimes we we ask our question and we set our hypothesis, but in order to analyze it, we may recognize that what we need to analyze and come to a conclusion is not available, which leads to a different action. We'll come back. And we want to analyze the results. What does the data indicate given your experiment's activities? And if you change your activities, how do you think the data will change? Our activities are the variable. A marketing approach, sending out mailers, reducing costs in certain areas, changing vendors, whatever it might be, those are the variables we're changing, and then we get data that's the outcome, and we want to compare what we did to the outcome and see if it makes sense and see if they're related to each other.
It's interesting, Sam, on that screen, because as we're talking about data analytics, I tend to ask you lots of questions, or I'm wondering, or I want to know, or I think this happened in our business or a client's business, or something's going on. And then I go to Sam for the data and the analyze piece. And that's where he really comes in. And that's the piece where I go, yeah, I know how to do a little bit of it. But when I'm dealing with hundreds of thousands of data points or 60,000 SKUs on an inventory listing, and I want to compare multiple years or something like that, I'm going to Sam and going, analyze this data for me to help make my audit better. But I always think of going straight to the analyze step. But there's a dialogue between us and a thought process and something I want to know. And what I'm really looking for is my report or the outcome, which is on your next slide. But all of our minds, I think when you say data analytics, we're right on that analyze step.
Oh, yeah. Everybody wants to run to that point. It's a lot more fun. It's like, hey. Yeah.
Fun for you. Yeah. I want the outcome and the report.
Shortcutting processes is a tale as old as time, because it's like, hey, do you want to learn how to drive? Yes, I do. Okay, well, 6 months of driver training, and then you have to take a quiz and a test, and then you have to wait a little while, and then you can have your driver's license. No, just give me the keys. I'm good.
That works.
Yeah.
No.
I can't wait to see your son driving. No. Based on that approach. That'll be interesting. So finally, we get to the results. So we want to report. So we want to show the results of the outcome of the experiment and the observations, and then see what kind of relationships we had. Obviously, when we do data analysis, like I said, two things happen when you do data analysis. You get a bunch of data, and you want to run toward the end, just like Janice said. And I'm no different. I like to get to the conclusion and be able to say, oh, here's what I see, and this is neat and interesting and useful. But when in the report stage, it's important to say, okay, well, what assumptions did we make? What data did we get? How did we go through this process? So that anybody interpreting these results who didn't do the analysis also understands the significance of the results, but also the limitations. Because we will make assumptions when we do data analysis. And it's important to write those down so that later when someone challenges you on, oh, well, we did this big marketing push and it increased our net income. And then when someone says, well, how did you correlate that? Because, yeah, we did this big marketing push, but we also won this large client maybe that we've been working on for 3 years, and that had nothing to do with the marketing push. So do we need to back that out? So those questions are good because it gives us insight and transparency into the results. But we also need to write them down so that there's transparency into the process. So using data analytics for problem solving. So now that we've gone through that process, we can basically take a look at the framework that I've put together that I use that guides me in my data analysis approach. I don't always use this in a super formal approach, but these are the steps I take. And depending on the significance or the size of the analysis, I may go through these in a very formal way to say, okay, are we identifying all these steps and using a checklist?
Yeah, I think you've supported litigation cases and with massive amounts of data in the past.
That is correct, absolutely. And this process is a result of those experiences as well as just research, experimentation, and saying, okay, well, checklists are good. I think we can all agree that life is complex and it's getting more complex. And if we don't have good checklists, it's easy to miss things. But yes, I have used these in some significant areas. And one of my larger clients that I do data analysis for on an ongoing basis, I follow this very rigidly to make sure that everybody knows exactly what I've been doing. And it's served me very well. So goals for data analysis, we want to achieve the goal of the analysis. That seems kind of self-evident, but I think we can all agree, I think most people would agree that sometimes we start doing things without knowing what our goals are. We just start taking action. So we want to know what the goal of the analysis is. We want to answer the questions that we're asked. What questions are you trying to answer? Identifying this with everyone, whether it's, as Janice said, she comes to me and we work together on different analyses within the firm and for our clients and internally. But I will ask her, I say, well, what question do you want to ask answered?
You always say, why do you want this? What are you going to do with it?
Right. Because while my skill set, I'm technical and analytical and structural, and that's definitely my strengths. I still need to understand a little bit about the context of what's happening so that I'm not taking action that's not going to serve a result. And then I'll explain that a bit to Janice as well so that if I'm missing anything from my understanding of the information, that she can correct me as well. I'm not making her an expert and she's not making me an expert, but there still has to be sort of a level of knowledge on each other's side. And that results in much better outcomes. We're looking for new informational insights, and we want to record relevant information. Documentation. Just put it right in the Excel spreadsheet. Just make a few notes. It'll help you later. You won't remember.
Of course I'll remember.
Everybody, yeah. So identify and articulate your goal. It seems kind of strange, but it's like we want to understand why net income has increased. We want to understand why turnover is higher than last year. Or we want to understand what our turnover trend is and the reasons for it. It can be as easy as that. But what's important to note is just because you know the goal doesn't mean that everybody else does. So we're back to writing it down. So if we write it down and say, this is my understanding of the goal, then everybody else can read that and say, oh yeah, I agree. The purpose of the analysis, we want to understand why turnover is higher this year because we want to reduce turnover. Now, maybe it was higher this year because a bunch of people retired. Okay, well, I mean, that's just the way that goes. But maybe it's a different reason. Maybe it's cultural. Maybe it's something else. But understand why are you doing this analysis? Because the goal is one thing, but if you can't really articulate a purpose, then again, why would you do that? And it's like, we want to understand why we're using more paper towels in the kitchen this year. Okay, that's a great goal, but why do you want to do that? Well, I'm tired of replacing the paper towels every week. It's like, okay, well, I think we'll live with that activity and we'll all be fine for it. Identify the necessary data. So I talked about this earlier. Sometimes you have the data, sometimes you don't. And if you don't have the data, then the next question would be, how do you think you can obtain that data in order to do the analysis that you want to perform? And Now, sometimes you can start an analytics project in the middle of your data and say, well, what data do we have? And then start talking about goals. But in general, you want to be goal-focused. But if you have a lot of data within your organization, you can probably start looking at it and saying, well, what really drives our business and what data do we have? How can we link this together? Because there may be opportunity to cross-correlate information between systems to improve your organization. Evaluate the data available, its structure and content. So what do you have and how is it structured?
It just reminds me of you always saying to me, Sam, can I get that in a flat file? And I
That's
said,
right.
What are you talking about? Actually know what that is, but.
Yeah, so getting it in a good structure is important because, if someone hands you 10,000 Post-it notes with information written down for sales, that's going to be a little more difficult to analyze than something that came in a nice, pretty format from a database, a flat file. But you want to be able to understand that because that's, when we do data analysis, a lot of times people say, oh, just do this analysis. Well, sometimes that takes 5 minutes. But if the data is a hot mess and on fire, then then the analysis might take 2 weeks to do something that could have taken 5 minutes if you had just requested the data in a different format.
I know Sam's helped me in some healthcare examples where you have millions of patients that are being seen and you have all these different commercial insurers and then you have your government payers and you have self-pay patients. And I say, well, it's easy. Just tell me how much of this did we expect through what you would call contractual allowances versus how much were actual write-offs or unexpected. And I want it by payer, by type of procedure over the last 3 years. And that's where we start getting into, okay, why do you want it? What are you going to do with it? Well, I'm auditing it. And I want to know the trends and what's happening. But do we have the necessary data? And that's usually where a lot of these discussions start. So I know what I want and I know the purpose, but do I actually have the data that I need?
And a lot of times those conversations, they usually turn out okay. But frequently it's, 95% of the information is in this file and 5% is in this other file. And then the next question is, how are those files related so we can bring them together? But yeah, it's a lot more conversation to make sure that, it's like saying, hey, is the car ready? Sure. Are all the pieces there? Well, you presume that all the pieces are there. But if you go out and you're missing a tire, it doesn't matter that you have 3 tires and the rest of the car. The whole system has to be there in order to really function effectively.
So as we're talking about this, Sam, are there specific tools that you often use? I mean, I know in audits we use Excel, we use IDEA and other. Are there specific tools, different databases or things that you would say you rely on more heavily than another?
Since Excel came to a new version, and Excel will now handle 1 million records, Excel is what I primarily use. But that it depends. The answer is data analysis can be done in any tool that works best for you. So if you have Excel, then that's what's going to work best for you. But if you have a SQL database and you have someone who understands SQL, SQL can do some really nifty things, and I do use SQL for some things. An IDEA we use in certain cases as well because it has some additional functionality with regard to not changing data that you're doing analysis on. We've all fat-fingered something in Excel and it's like, oh, I changed that to an S and it used to be $2 million, right? S.
That's not good.
Yeah, this isn't footing anymore. That's weird. So there are many different tools available. My response would be, well, what kind of analysis do you plan on doing? If you're not doing a lot of analysis now, we'll start with Excel and build from there. Jumping to a tool, if you don't have a good process or the expertise or the right people to do the analysis, getting a tool isn't going to be very good. It's like, we'd love to fly a plane, but we still need someone who knows how to fly a plane.
And have you used Excel, say, for $1 million company versus $1 billion company? I know you've worked with the whole range.
Yeah, I've used Excel for $1 billion companies, and I've used SQL for $1 million companies. It really depends on the analysis. It comes down to the complexity of the data that you're working with, and the complexity of the analysis that you're performing.
Thanks.
Sure. We want to document assumptions made and potential impact or influence on the analysis. Are we assuming that what assumptions are you making? That this is the best data available? That this is absolutely correct sales information? There are a variety of assumptions that we make regarding data and information, that it's complete. Sometimes you have to assume that a file is complete even in the absence of being able to prove that. If you're testing sales for the year, hopefully you can pull that file and then compare it to the audited financial statements and say, oh, well, these tie. Okay, that's a great comparison. It's a good control total. You're happy. But sometimes you don't have that information and you have to assume that it's complete. Well, it's good to write that down and say, we're assuming that this is complete because we couldn't tie it back to anything. And in those cases, that way when someone says, well, how do you know this file is complete? And you might say, oh, well, we tied it out to the financial statements. But if someone says, well, how do you know this file is complete? We say, well, somebody else gave it to us, and they're the experts. We just had to assume it was complete. And then someone might say, possibly in a legal standing, in a courtroom, which happened to me, well, how can you be sure of that? I say, well, I can't, because that was the Department of Revenue, and they gave me the data. I'm not going to question that data. And there may be nowhere else to go except to say, I have no reason to believe that this isn't the best data. A lot of times we're always looking for that positive confirmation. Oh, I know this is right. But sometimes the conclusion is, well, I have no reason to believe this isn't correct. But we want to document those assumptions. And then we design a model for analysis, plan of attack. So we have our goal, we have our purpose, we've identified the data and where it is, and we've made some assumptions. And now we're going to design a model. Now, during the first 5 steps, we were probably already thinking about the model and the analysis and plan of attack. But this is the formal step where you say, okay, well, here's exactly what we're going to do, and here's how we're going to approach this, and here are the conclusions we're going to come up with, or here's how this is going to develop our conclusions. The nice thing about analysis is if you set these things up, then the outcome is whatever it might be. So we're not influencing it in a subjective manner, right? And by doing it in that way, we can make sure that we're basing our future decisions in a more objective fashion. Now, we still have subjective influence, but objectivity is what helps us to really make better decisions. A salesperson who's in charge of the new marketing campaign is going to say, well, I'm pretty sure that our marketing campaign led to our net increase in our net income. I'm pretty sure. I don't think we need to do the analysis. Well, that person would have a vested interest in that outcome. But if you can decide on the approach before you start analyzing data, if everybody agrees that the approach is sound, then the outcome is the outcome. And it's a little more free from that subjective influence.
This is definitely the step where I say, ooh, have I called Sam yet? So hopefully you all have either a Sam or you are that person who's really good with data in your department. Where I say, have I called Sam yet to help me design this model for analysis and plan of attack? Because he's going to do it much more quickly and efficiently than I would.
Right. And you do audited financial statements faster than I do.
I think that would be true because you're not going to touch one of our audited financial statements.
That's correct. That's correct. So step 7 here, articulate your expectation. Remember we talked about the scientific method earlier. What do you expect? Well, we're going to do this analysis, but before we do it, I think that the outcome will be this. Again, it doesn't have to be a 10-page document saying, well, here's what I think is going to happen. It can be something as simple as, well, I think that these are the reasons for our increase in net income. And then why you think those things. And it helps us to better understand the results, because if you write down your expectation or your thoughts, and then you have your final analysis and results, you can then look at those, and 2 things will happen. One, you'll have your results, and you'll say, oh, that's really the way it is. And the second thing is you can then look back at what you had anticipated and have a better understanding of why you thought that and what the gap was between what you thought was going to happen and what did happen. But if you don't write it down, you're going to say, oh, yeah, I kind of thought this other, I was pretty, I actually thought it was the way it turned out, which doesn't really help us to change our perspective on how things really work and operate. Step 8, we finally prepare the data and evaluate the model and approach. So this is where you just crank the numbers. You go through the analysis process. You do your comparisons and summarizations, set up some graphs, take a look at the information, and see if you can see correlation or causation. A quick note on correlation and causation. Correlation just means that one thing begets another and they look like they go together. So, for example, over the past 200 years, as the number of pirates has gone down, the global temperature has gone up. Well, that's correlated. As the number of pirates have gone down, the global temperature has gone up. Well, I'm pretty sure that the reduction in pirates is not the cause of global temperature rise. So correlation is not the same as causation. So it's important to note that you can analyze for that as well, and to be careful about that. So we do the analysis, and then we report on the findings. We compare to our expectations, compare what you expected to what came out, identify your limitations. And as I said earlier, I was talking about checking completeness of information. I was introduced to this sentence, and this is something that's used in courtrooms a great deal, which is, we found no evidence to suggest that we could not rely on the results from our analysis. Because people will say, well, how do you know this is the fact? It's like, well, I don't, but I don't see any reason why it's not the fact either. In the legal standing, one of the concepts is, a lot of times people are looking for absolutes. This is absolutely correct. But in courtrooms, in courtroom cases where there's a contest, the court isn't looking for the absolute right answer. They're looking for the best answer presented. So if someone says, well, how do you know this is right? You say, well, I think it's the best approach we had, and we have nothing to suggest that it's not correct. And then kind of the unstated question is, do you have something better? Because if you don't have something better, then we have to go with this. And that's what we're all trying to do. We're trying to find the best approach to go forward. Some benefits of frameworks, obviously, building from a pre-existing foundation, having a good checklist. It's good to have this kind of information available. Efficiency. Having a framework means that you can move through much more quickly than trying to reinvent it every time you go through it. It's more effective. Nobody's trying to build their own car for the most part. Somebody else already did that in a pretty good way. So you always have that one guy who's trying to build his own spaceship. I think there's a guy out west who's trying to do that. I believe he's going to prove that the Earth is flat. But there's no need to reinvent the wheel. It can be fun, and I'm guilty of doing that myself. But feel free to use this framework for your own benefits. Some drawbacks of frameworks: structure is good, understanding is better. A lot of times people will say, "Oh, well, it just locks us in too tightly." Okay, well, a framework is meant to be moved in and out of in a fluid way. So we want to make sure we have understanding as well as good structure. And on the spectrum, we want to find that balance. Obviously, the framework will intersect with your environment in a specific way. No battle plan survives contact with the enemy. So going back steps is fine, and clarity of responsibility, you and the framework. Who's doing what steps, and how are you communicating those things? So from a wrapping up, starting your data analytics journey. Oh, Janice wants to talk.
I'm excited, Sam. You're going to finally teach me exactly how to do these data analytics.
That's correct.
Yeah.
No. This is a process.
You don't think I can master SQL idea, like all the tricks you have in Excel? And
you can. You just have to stop doing audits.
Oh, I don't think that's a very good plan.
And stop seeing your family.
That's true. I guess you've spent, 2 decades mastering this.
Yes,
so.
Yeah. This is how my brain works.
Yes.
It's another way of saying.
And that's a very good thing, because mine does not work that way. But that's why I have you to say, hey, Sam, do this.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right. So, yes, I will now tell you how to do data analytics, Janice. So the steps for data analysis, as far as your organization, it really boils down to, how do you eat a whale?
One bite at a time.
One bite at a time, that's right. it's not about saying, oh, we're now going to do data analytics everywhere. It's about picking points and saying, well, what do we want to analyze? What do we want to understand better so that we can do something better?
That is true, Sam. I do run a lot of data analytics. I just do them on a much smaller scale. And what I can do at quickly and efficiently,
Right.
larger projects, I turn to you.
Yeah, exactly. And we're all doing some sort of data analytics. I mean, if you keep your own budget at home, you're looking at your spending. I mean, that's analytics. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, I asked everyone to kind of write down some items that they're interested in. So take one of those areas that I asked about, a measurable objective in your organization. Pick one of those areas where you want to see improvement. It's the first step. What's the most important area for us to focus on? Set your expectations and test your ideas. What do we expect this area to be at, or how do we want to make it better? How can we make it better? We want to test those ideas. Get the resources you need. As the framework talks about, what ideas do we have? What objectives do we have? What data do we have? But also, what people do we have? Obviously, when we talk about data analytics, it's like, well, who can do this analysis? But the other question to ask is, well, what areas of the organization or business are we going to be looking at? Do we need to go talk to those people as well? So involving them in the analysis also means that you'll get a better outcome, because if they're involved, they're going to have some buy-in, they're going to have some skin in the game, and they're going to probably be more willing to change their behaviors going forward. Do the process, the 10-step framework that we just talked about. What's your goal? What's your data? What's your analysis? What are your conclusions? You can fit those 10 steps kind of under that area. Consider what you've learned and how the new perspective can inform your future actions. What are you going to do differently? Janice is frequently doing planning and capacity planning for staff here at McKonly and Asbury, and she's always looking at new ways to understand how that staff management is occurring, so that everybody can not work 80 hours a week and have a work-life balance, and we can meet all of our clients' expectations. So she takes a look at that information and then says, well, how do we do this better? And I do that with a lot of my clients as well. I do modeling for one client that can impact them in the millions of dollars range, and I provide them with those models, and I talk to them about the limitations and impacts, and then they say, okay, well, if we do these things differently, how would that impact the model? Then I could do some math, and I get back to them. And then they act, and they, based on what they've learned, they change their behaviors. And sometimes you have to do the analysis on a frequent basis, monthly evaluations of accounts receivable, and then you change your behavior because you want your days outstanding to go down. That's usually a good thing, right, Janice?
That would be a good thing.
Okay,
Improve cash flow.
Just checking.
In most cases,
Yeah.
yes. As long as you're not angering your customers.
Right.
There's a balance.
There's a balance. But you want to take action on that, and then like we started, with the beginning in mind. Select that area where you want to see improvement, and then act, and then remeasure it to see if you get that improvement.
Sam, you've touched on a couple different ways that you've helped companies, but you kind of touched on the surface of them. Could you give her one or two maybe more detailed examples of ways you've actually helped an organization or the outcome? I know you've testified in court, but you help businesses every day with large data analysis projects. As I said, a lot of us are doing data analytics on small scales, particularly the accountants, which are a lot of the people on the phone or on this webinar today, are doing some level of data analytics already. So what are some of the massive scale things you've done?
Two of the larger scales, as you mentioned, I did do some data analytics for Lebanon County for a court case where they had been receiving, they had a large fraud, and the analysis involved basically reperforming how those funds should have been distributed. That involved getting information and data from the Department of Revenue and comparing it to information and address information from Lebanon County. And to the point of the framework, the analysis, step 7 or 8, whichever one it was, where you just do the analysis, was definitely an important part of that. But all the other steps around it were as important or even more important because of how it set the context for individuals who were going to receive the information and prepared them to receive the conclusions. Now, to be fair to that process, one of the things that was definitely a highlight from that experience was that we could have done a little bit better job clarifying the goal of that process. Because at the beginning, everyone said, yeah, do the analysis, but everyone had an expectation that the analysis would show that nothing needed to be changed, when the actual analysis showed that some entities had been overpaid and some had been underpaid. So because we had not set that expectation as a group, when the analysis was done and it didn't meet people's expectations, there was some unhappiness. And that ended up in court because now, ultimately, when it came to court, the observation was, well, there isn't a better way to do this. And I felt, I wouldn't have done the analysis if I didn't think so, but the analysis was pretty well founded based on the information we had available. In another case, an analysis I do for another large client for their tax group, I use information from about 40 different entities internationally to calculate management fee costs between those entities. And they do a lot of modeling throughout the year with updated actual cost information and then changes to some different variables within the organization. And then they're always doing modeling and planning questions. It's like, well, if we change this, how will this impact this? Because they're making very large decisions that have millions of dollars of impact to net income bottom line for that organization. So sometimes but making sure that the whole process is meeting the needs. So, when I'm doing management fee calculations, it's about making sure that the information is available and provided in a timely manner, but also responding to requests. So, and a big part of that engagement for me is having a structure where I can quickly make changes to the analysis to provide new answers. So building the structure and the model is just as important, and having a dynamic model is just as important as having just the answer. Because if you have the answer, but someone says, well, how do you change? I want to change this one variable. If you have to go through a 2-day process to redo that just for one little change, that doesn't make it as effective or useful.
I just thought of one thing, and maybe you can elaborate on this because I know you did this work. We had an organization call us at one point in time and said, hey, we're doing a new system conversion, and we need one of your staff to come out for 4 weeks and tick and tie every single number from old to new system, which I don't think I did, but there were discussions of, well, why would we do that manually? And couldn't there be a better way? In comes Sam and some of our other experts in the firm as well.
Yeah.
And what was the outcome of that?
Oh, yeah. So basically, instead of having 4 weeks of people staring at numbers, we had about 2 weeks of time, and we ticked and tied every number from the old system to the new system.
So every single transaction?
Every single transaction.
So you saved a tremendous amount of time and validated 100% of the data with no human error.
That's correct.
See, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
They're the kind of wins I like.
Yeah, yeah. And then also we didn't have staff who were walking out of a client looking hazy-eyed and wondering where they are.
Ticked and tied numbers,
Correct.
50 hours
Yeah.
a week for weeks on end.
Yeah, and the level of certainty obviously goes up when you're not sampling and you're doing 100%. Yeah, absolutely. So that's everything for today. Janice, do you have any other comments?
I didn't, but I guess that last example technically wasn't data analytics, but it certainly involved data.
Oh, it's totally data analytics. It's comparative analytics.
Okay, great.
Does this match this? The goal is everything there that we expect it to be? And
Great. I
you
wasn't
test it
thinking of it exactly that way.
Yeah,
So
no.
thank you.
Everything's data analytics. Well, thanks very much. Appreciate everyone joining us today. I just have this nice quote here. Edwards Deming was a data analytics pioneer. And if you want to look him up and learn more about data analytics from him, you will learn many amazing and excellent things. There's a society based on his work and teachings. But it is not enough to do your best. You must know what to do and then do your best. So I encourage you all to take your next steps into data analytics. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to either myself or Janice, and we'd love to talk to you and answer any questions you may have. And thank you for attending.
Thank you once again for joining us for this webinar recap. You can stay connected to us and learn more about all of our upcoming events by visiting us at www.macpas.com. Have a great day.